Welcome everyone, and welcome to our third webinar on Nocturnal Scratch and update on all around this digital measure, all the new developments. We've been together since 2 weeks ago, so we heard about the recent regulatory feedback, we heard about the innovation in R&D of tools and algorithms, and today we have an amazing panel, amazing presenters here to talk about processes, validation, adoption, all the guidelines, frameworks that helped shape this digital measure to where it's here, helped guide everyone who participated in all of the efforts, whether collaborative or not. And we will hear from our panelists about how to take this further, what awaits digital measure of Nocturnal Scratch in the future, and where they see it going. So with this, a little bit of housekeeping. As you all know, this session is being recorded. It will be published on Dime Webinar's website very soon, up to a few days after this session. And in the panel discussion, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, either raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. And either somebody from panelists can type you an answer, or we can incorporate it into the debate. And with this, I will hand over the word to Jen, one of our moderators today, together with Laura Alliance, and she will be introducing our amazing guests.
Fantastic, Lucy. Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone on the line. This is the culmination of a really, I think, special series of discussions, and more importantly, the culmination of several years of work taking a powerful a case example that is both important to patients and to scientific and clinical decision making, and using it as a spear to really drive the advancement of evaluation. And our topic for today, my favorite topic, the adoption of high value digital clinical measures in clinical research and into healthcare itself. We have an absolutely exceptional group of panelists joining us for discussion today. For folks who may not know me, my name's Jen Goldsack. I'm the CEO here at the Digital Medicine Society, and I'm going to call on my colleagues one by one to give a quick introduction so you can really appreciate the expertise on the line with us today. Thorsten, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Please take yourself off mute and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jen. So my name is Thorsten Vetter. I'm Scientific Officer at the European Medicines Agency in the Office for Scientific Advice. I take care of our Qualification of Novel Methodologies program, which is a platform to allow for the qualification of novel tools, which are supposed to be used to generate evidence for the development of medicinal products for benefit risk assessment. And we have certainly a specific focus on the development of innovative digital measures. And I'm very happy to join this webinar. Thanks.
Thorsten, really happy you're here. You've been such a strong leader in all of this and incredibly thoughtful about the different frameworks, the evidence we need to really make sure that the scientific rigor is there and that we're also moving quickly for the patients that we're all here to serve. Bray, please go ahead, go next.
Hi, I'm Bray Patrick Lake. I am a digital health specialist in FDA's Digital Health Center of Excellence. I'm working quite a bit on digital health technologies and clinical trials, and also moving care into the home.
Fantastic. You are working on those things quite a bit. We have the privilege of chatting with you about those things often. Bray, thanks for joining us today. Jeff, please go ahead.
I'm very happy to join this webinar. My name is Jeffrey Siegel. I'm Office Director for the Office of Drug Evaluation Sciences in the Office of New Drugs at FDA. Our office is responsible for qualifying digital health technologies, clinical outcome assessments, and biomarkers, among other things.
Among other things, indeed. Jeff, thanks for joining us today. That's such an important perspective. Christine, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So I'm Christine Guo. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Actigraph. So we're a DHT solution provider and really focusing on the deployment and the use of those data for clinical development purpose. And in this context, we lead a pre-competitive collaboration focusing on the analytical validation and the usability of Nocturnal Scratch. I think some of you have heard it from my colleague, Sylvain Zorman, from the last seminar. So
terrific. Christine, thanks for joining us. And Actigraph really is a true leader in the space. We've done extensive work, actually, we'll talk about that today, to really prove out the value of this measure. And you guys have then picked up what we threw down to think about now, how do we build the and evaluate the appropriate algorithm. So it's tremendous to see this driving forward. Tarek, please go next.
Hello, everyone, from a toasty Boston morning, which is a uncommon occurrence. But my name is Tarek. I work at Takeda in our digital health sciences team, where we support the development and deployment of digital health technologies across our therapeutic areas. Very happy to be here.
Thanks, Tarek. Welcome. And we love working with you guys. I think the way you think about deployment is something we all can learn from. So thanks for being here. Carrie, go ahead.
Just too many buttons. Carrie Northcott, I'm the head of digital sciences at Pfizer. Our group really looks at the development, validation, how we can utilize these within clinical trials and beyond. Been involved with the Nocturnal Scratch in this group for quite a number of years now.
You have, and Carrie, you're being very modest. I think a lot of the impetus for any of this work right from the beginning came from you. I remember early conversations where you would talk to us about the importance of this work to patients. And I remember sitting with you when we had the first qualitative data readout, and we were all in tears as we heard stories from kids and from adults whose lives were really affected. So just thank you for all of your leadership.
Thank you.
Bola, go ahead.
I just to echo those sentiments, recognizing Carrie's leadership. I'm Bola Grace. I'm Senior Director at GSK. Similar to Carrie's team, we look at digital measurements, outcomes, assessments, we look at wearables and sensors. And similar to Carrie, we've been closely working with the team here, looking at, as part of the consortium with TIP, as well as DIME. So it's been fantastic to see this initiative come to this point.
Bola, thank you for your leadership too. GSK has really been committed to this throughout. So it's great to have the full sort of gang here, and you really have been a powerful leader. Speaking of which, Tom, you've been in it since the beginning with the playbook and V3.
And even precedes that, I know there's alumni from previous work before DIME was even formed. No, I'm great to be here. Tom Switzer, I actually work for Genentech as the lead of the digital health, really focusing on what I'm now calling endpoint optimization through the use of technologies really to help progress our molecule forward. I'm actually not a veteran of the Nocturnal Scratch part because we haven't had any assets in Nocturnal Scratch, although I did ask Carrie one time if we had it for chronic spontaneous urticaria, and it was really fascinating to hear kind of difference in scratching. But I do have an interest in other sort of episodic intensive measurements and looking to leverage what happens with the Nocturnal Scratch for other work that we have got going on in different indications.
I love it here, flying the flag for translational science, Tom. I love to hear it. And last but not least, John, our sort of partner in crime between Deep and DIME.
Hi, yeah, so John Batchelor, a science liaison at Deep Measures, and we help accelerate digital measure development and simplify collaboration. So my previous roles, I've worked with Tom and Lada at Roche, right in the middle of the kind of PCOR digital measure kind of space. For quite a while, and yeah, very excited to be here. And as a parent of a 1-year-old with atopic dermatitis, I have a keen interest in what happens in the discussion here as well. So yeah.
We are committed to moving this forward, John. So for folks on the line, as you can tell, we have an exceptional group of experts, also a large group of experts. This is how we're going to use our time to make sure that we sort of communicate as much information as we can to those of you who have taken time with us. So we're going to start with short presentations. We're going to have Tom followed by John providing some sort of briefings on state of the field. Then we're going to move to an open discussion. We are not going to have live Q&A voiceover session, but if you have questions as we go, please feel free to use the chat function, and all of us will be monitoring that. We'll try and have a very engaging sort of chat going throughout both the presentations and the panel discussion. So we'll move straight into those short presentations to get us going. Tom, we're going to come to you first to talk about the V3 framework, and perhaps more importantly, the now extended V3 framework, and how that underpins all of these measures, whether it's in Nocturnal Scratch or some of those other areas where you're looking to translate the findings.
Sounds great. We'll go through the V3 plus framework reviews. Jen mentioned we just sort of revised it earlier this year with a launch back in February and a publication that's under review right now. And I'm considering actually the V3 to be basically foundational. And we have used it as a means of engaging with regulators around endpoints just to get their feedback and the certain constructs that it actually touches on that I think are really important. So next slide. So just a sort of review of what V3 was. The original V3 was the verification, analytical validation, and clinical validation. We inserted the usability as part of this. This is looking sort of linear, but it's really not linear. It's more modular, which I'll talk a little bit about, where I think that these are all sort of necessary elements that need to take place. In terms of what verification was, going quickly, it really looks at the sample level data that with the sensors themselves. Usability looks at how people sort of interact with the technology. I always think of it as if you can't get on a person to collect the data you want, you're not going to get the data that you need. Analytical validation touches on the performances of the algorithm, how we take sort of the sample level data and roll it into something that's sort of meaningful. And then the clinical validation really looks at how meaningful this is to patients and what it actually measures, and does it show from our side whether there's a therapeutic benefit as from the technology and the specific endpoint that we are collecting data for. Next slide. I think I'm driving. Just have how we integrated the usability validation. Again, it's kind of this iterative process that sits kind of across all three of these other sort of foundational processes, really looking at how the technology gets evaluated and sort of iterated again around getting it into the user's hands and making sure that the users who are the intended users can use the technology correctly. Because I think otherwise you get sort of noise in there. Specifically at the Roche side, we've done some interesting sort of work with our human factors engineers, really looking at getting some very specific feedback prior to putting it into trials. For me, it's always a sense of how we want to de-risk this to put it into trials to collect the data that we need. And again, this is a bit of a circular process about these sort of formative evaluations, which kind of takes place between the verification and analytical validation, and then the sort of summative and changes as the technology evolves, as the measures evolve, to go back to basically make sure that the technology is fit for purpose and does not cause the user harm. All right, we can move on. So quick on the verification side, two kind of fundamental questions we like to ask. Is my sensor fit for purpose? Does it collect what I want based upon sort of either the treatment effect or the pathophysiology or the changes to the disease? And the second one is my sensor good or garbage? And I mean, is it just a singular sensor or is it my batch of sensors? We often refer to this kind of sample level data. We used to call this the raw data, but it's basically output that comes from the sensor. That is the base outputs that we can basically construct features on, and then we can roll those features on into kind of meaningful measurements. In this case, we usually look at does the sensor meet pre-specified performance goals that are easily testable to achieve their outcome. Normally, these are established by the manufacturer based upon the intended use of the technology. And I always look at it as things like test reliability, consistency across devices over time, really understanding do the measurements drift, do there need to be corrective factors in there, et cetera. So again, often this is kind of a function of the manufacturer, but from the pharma company, we actually need to work with the manufacturers to make sure that the technology they're producing, if we're not producing it, meets our kind of performance requirements. And often we'll look at things like the design history files and whether they're built under sort of an ISO 13485 compliant framework, so that we have some level of trust into using the data. Okay, move on to the next one. Around the usability validation, which I touched on, which is really the one important question. Can the DHT, the sensor-based DHT, be used to achieve the specified goals with ease, efficiency, and user satisfaction? Can people who are interacting with the technology use it correctly? And within the stated intended use, which includes a description of all intended users. And again, this can evolve basically potentially as the measures expand to different populations. But as we mentioned early, sometimes the measures can be kind of qualified under a specific population. Atopic dermatitis, which has a very specific scratch type, can this be sort of generalized into, can this same sensor be used for scratching an atopic derm? Can it be used for something like psoriasis or chronic idiopathic urticaria, something like that? Next slide. So for analytical validation, sort of three kind of core questions we're looking at, which is how well does the algorithm perform in the potential with a potential target population, which is our intended users with the disease under study who are receiving treatment with biotherapeutics. Does the sensor-based DHT really measure the clinical concept it claims to measure as defined by a reference measure? We know we have some standards which we want to see the performance, something like polysomnography for sleep is a great example, or a gait lab for walking. And can the algorithm acceptably measure, detect, or predict a clinical condition when that algorithm is applied to data captured by a verified sensor in accordance with a specific protocol in a particular population? Very, very prescriptive, but basically, again, showing that the algorithm is applicable towards the patients we're using in the context of the trial to measure what we have pre-specified, particularly around sort of an endpoint. As I mentioned, we usually look at reference measures for this sort of analytical validation, gait dynamic against motion capture systems, or PSG. And the reference measures are agreed upon there. You can use the literature to support it. From our side, we always look at this as almost as data levels. I look at it as a L0, we call it L0 data, which is like a sensor level data, which can be raw accelerometry data. And L1, which the algorithmic or the analytical validation would be taking that raw data into a feature, which could be a step or a scratch, something like that. And then basically algorithmically, can that step or scratch as a fundamental measurement be processed into something more meaningful, which would be like a scratching bout or a coughing bout or sleep or something like that. As I find sometimes for these episodic sort of diseases, the bouts actually may be clinically more relevant, which leads us into the next concept. We can move into the next slide. So the clinical validation is really, the two questions: can a sensor drive outcome measurement that is undergone these verification, usability validation, analytical validation be used to answer a specific clinical question? Is it clinically meaningful? Yes, it can detect a change. Is this change clinically meaningful? And are the data clinically meaningful in the stated context of use? And again, this is clinical meaningfulness to the patient. Sometimes these sensors can detect changes that actually patients aren't sensitive to, but that they may be clinically important. And from an endpoint perspective, we've actually looked at this kind of idea, the pre-specified MCID, or meaningfully clinically important difference. So in engaging with regulators around the use of the endpoint, they accept that a clinically meaningful endpoint would be a 40% reduction in the average nocturnal scratch time status. You can hear over a 2-week period of time when we're able to aggregate that data and look at it on the day-over-day sort of variability. How do you compute MCID is a topic for another discussion. We have a 40-page technical paper on that, but I do find it fascinating that you have to pre-specify what this change actually looks like. And that your sensor-based technology can actually detect what that change is if you want to use to support a label claim. And lastly, this is the last slide. So again, just to mention the modular evaluation process. Again, if you have verification and the hardware firmware changes, do you need to re-verify, or do you need to look at that compatibility? Usability validation, if there's changes to intended use or use specifications, do you need to repeat the usability validation, or can you look at where the generalizability is? And you have to ask the questions, could we validate this algorithm in this patient population, and if they're very closely related, do we have to revalidate? Do you do it in a small cohort of 10 patients, or do you need to run a much larger validation study? Analytical validation, looking at the changes to software that change the algorithm, or changes to the hardware, software, firmware, how they actually look from a platform base. Do you need to repeat the validation to continue to use, or do you have to document the back compatibility with it? And then lastly, on the clinical validation, if you expand to a new patient population, what do you need to do in order to make sure that the sort of measurement is clinically validated? And if we need to repeat that, or any repeat of these steps, again, all very helpful. And I can speak from experience when we put it into a briefing package that using these sort of verification, analytical validation, clinical validation constructs, when trying to describe a novel sort of digital tool, is actually really helpful. And it seems, at least from the FDA and actually some European regulators as well, that it's a useful framework for just engaging with them to understand, is your tool ready, even prior to putting it into patients as part of some pre-meetings. So I strongly consider it a foundational effort, and I'm glad we added the usability into it, just because, just from experience, if you don't understand that usability component, it'll kind of impact the ability to actually collect the data that you think you're collecting when it comes time for analysis. So with that, I will hand it over, I think, John, for the next one.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to describe a little bit about what DEEP is, and introduce the stack model, and share how DEEP can enable collaboration to advance the validation and qualification of digital measures, and illustrate that with the Nocturnal Scratch use case. Next slide, please. So what is DEEP? So DEEP accelerates digital measure development by combining or integrating several relevant, accepted best practices and guidance, including the V3 framework, but is also informed, the DEEP stack model is also informed by relevant FDA and EMA guidance and prior work that's happened within CITI, Transcelerate, ISPOR, and also controlled terminology as well, important part of this in terms of CDISC and NIH and others. There are many other things that go into DEEP. But DEEP combines these best practices and guidance into a single tool. And this is really powered by the DEEP stack model and the cloud platform, the collaboration tools. And they help provide a structured validation blueprint for teams developing digital measures to follow. And the end result of all of this is structured digital measure knowledge, or knowledge that describes digital measures, the evidence that's attached to them, and the regulatory intelligence associated with them. And this, so we're following FAIR principles, essentially. And once this data is fair, this enables structured evidence to support multiple qualification pathways with different regulators, and a number of other downstream use cases, to be honest with you. With the world moving more to kind of AI based things, then fair data is absolutely critical to enabling that type of technology. Next slide, please. So how does DEEP support these new ways of working? So the network of catalogs and tools within the DEEP platform really help build transparency between different stakeholders, fostering this opportunity for pre-competitive alignment and further collaboration. The stack model really enables this kind of content reuse. So that's a big part of this kind of stack model. It's it is scalable and extensible, and this reuse and standardization helps kind of fuel automation and greater efficiency. And the model itself also, because it is harmonized, really promotes this comparison between digital measures, makes them more comparable to regulators, HTA bodies, payers, whoever is really the audience for the data. It could be clinical teams as well that you're working with. And this then encourages harmonization, which is what we want to see, is kind of a general harmonization of measures, so that these types of measures can be used to assess things across multiple different use cases. Next slide, please. So I'm going to tell a story a little bit around the Nocturnal Scratch case study, and much of this has been shared in the previous webinars, so I won't go over it, but it really extends on the kind of pioneering work started by DIME. A new consortia took forward to kind of build on that work, reusing what had been established before. And the end goal was to seek advice from the European Medicines Agency around Nocturnal Scratch as a measurable concept, but also develop a standard for measuring Nocturnal Scratch, and explore how new digital measure solutions could be validated against that standard, rather than individually themselves. And the goal of the engagement was also to explore the concepts of reuse and extendability of evidence for Nocturnal Scratch in atopic dermatitis into similar contexts of use like psoriasis, as Tom mentioned. Next slide, please. So this team, they built a stack within the DEEP platform, and this consisted of a measurement definition, kind of what was being measured, the clinical interpretation, the context of use, they also developed a target solution profile. So this is the technical standard where the analytical, technical, usability requirements from V3 all really come together as well. And this was actually informed by devices that were there was the prior work or prior published work that was identified in the work that had been started in DIME. Was all brought into this, and you can see the stack model breaks a digital measure down to its component parts, so re-emphasizing the kind of modular approach of this. Next slide, please. So this is the platform view of or representation of the stack model, the measurement definition block. So this is actually showing the concept of interest here of nocturnal scratch and the measurement variables associated with that. And the meaningful aspect of health and the concept of interest definitions are really tied with evidence to this measurement definition. And that was the sort of the foundational element of the stack that the team pulled together, incorporating all of this prior work. Next slide, please. The team then created a target solution profile. They created a technical standard for how you could measure the measurement as defined in the measurement definition. So this is the first target solution profile ever created by a team of experts collaboratively. So it was an exciting milestone to see this happen. And on the screen here, you can see a number of different requirements. And these cover, again, the kind of technical, analytical usability standards incorporating V3 Plus. And we also have quite a detailed list of checklists behind this as well, which are informed by many of the other guidances I mentioned before. Next slide, please. So the catalogue for the pilot looked a bit like this. So the top blue block there was the measurement definition described in atopic dermatitis. The grey block is the target solution profile or the technical standard created by the team. And these were really created to inform and organise the knowledge in preparation for the ITF procedure. And within that procedure, it was discussed around the body of evidence needed for regulatory validation of the top blue block. What does actually, when you reuse and what is so the development of the actual psoriasis block happened or was discussed. And then the creation of the purple bottom at the bottom. So this is a new digital measure solution informed by the target solution profile. Next slide, please. So there were two key scenarios being tested here, really, in this interaction, I suppose, and two key reuse scenarios. Scenario one, extending the measure to another condition, being psoriasis, and really assessing what would the delta evidence be needed to be able to reuse that and then fill the gaps. And then scenario two, developing a new instrument block. So what is the potential for plugging in new instrumentation into this target solution profile that had been reviewed by the regulators? Next slide, please. I'd just like to kind of focus on the purple boxes at the bottom. But what was really learned from this pilot? I hear you ask. But really, the feedback from the participants in terms of the regulator and the applicant team, this structured approach was really, really beneficial and had a high potential for increasing the quality of evidence submitted. It was a great educational tool as well. The reuse of evidence for new conditions showed potential, but needed further investigation. A really key thing was that this technology agnostic approach centered around a target solution profile rather than specific instrumentation or devices was appealing. And I think everybody agreed that a lot was learned through this pilot. It was valuable to pilot this at this early stage with a real life use case, and that further kind of pilots would be really, really valuable with incorporating different pathways, different regulators. And the end kind of in terms of next steps is really testing this on full qualification and additional use cases where we can test that reuse, and conducting pilots with other key stakeholders such as notified bodies as well, covering different regulatory pathways. And I've got one slide to finish on, is just to sort of for some food for thought. And this is, I think most of the panel have been working digital measures for a while and can probably relate to the hype cycle here, in that we've many years ago, a few years ago, we were seeing this peak of inflated expectations. We were almost at the peak here. And people were throwing things into studies without much thought for their meaningfulness and kind of really what was the intended purpose, and being flooded with data as a result. I think we've now gone through this trough of disillusionment, or we're sort of, maybe we're just coming out of the bottom of it, where people realize this is really complex, right? It requires collaboration, which is hard because it's a new thing for many of us in some of these areas. But we've got some of these excellent kind of frameworks and things that have emerged. And so I would say that we're digging ourselves out of the slope of enlightenment. And we'd love to get to the plateau of productivity as soon as we can, so that we can really get things in the hands of patients. So it is my call to action, I suppose. What can each of us, what can each stakeholder do to accelerate arriving at the plateau of productivity in terms of collaboration and advancing the science? That's my leaving thought. Thank you.
Tremendous. Tom, John, thank you so much. And John, a great slide to have to transition into our discussion. And as we welcome our sort of fellow experts to the screen here, I think we've all really felt the passage through the through the life cycle, or the hype cycle that you shared with us there. So as we find ourselves now sort of on hopefully level ground here, Carrie, I'm going to come to you first. You have been, as we discussed, sort of a champion of all of this work from the very beginning. We've also talked a lot today about the different frameworks. How do you see sort of the different frameworks, the different consortia complementing each other here?
They've been, so first of all, thank you, everybody. This has been an amazing ride with pharma, FDA, EMA, DIME, DEEP, et cetera. And I think what you've seen emerge are great instruction manuals, if you will, and they complement each other tremendously well. You heard a lot of common things: verification, validation, analytical and clinical, meaningfulness, operations, and you're seeing those echo amongst both of these presentations. And then I've seen these things complement each other within the Nocturnal Scratch. Various consortia have taken place. The really exciting thing with this, at least with the Nocturnal Scratch, was a way to test the tires on all these different validation frameworks that are coming about. So we developed these frameworks, the original V3, and we said, all right, let's use Nocturnal Scratch as an example. What do we need to do? And we realized that we needed to align on language, ontology, terminology, make sure we're talking about the right things, understand meaningfulness. All of that grew. And now we have this new and improved V3 plus methodology, which really feeds well into what we did with DEEP as well. And I'm seeing the recurring theme of now, these are phenomenal. How do we change diseases? Do we have to start all over again, or can we use some of this information? Can we? What about the evolvement of different devices and algorithms? All of those will continue to get better. So we're pressure testing all of these different frameworks that are coming out, and I'm going to argue they're not different. They're actually, if you look at them, they're really the same. They may have like boxes versus lines, but they're very much identical. So throughout these past years, we've seen these great framework to ensure that the data that we're collecting is accurate, valuable, meaningful, and will add to the toolbox that we have to understand not only how drugs work, but the diseases that will only help patients, healthcare, and science as we go forward. And it's been really exciting to see Nocturnal Scratch be one of those that got to test those different frameworks and see them build. And I'm really excited to where this is going to go in the future, because this is just one. As we all know, Nocturnal Scratch, well, it's near and dear to my heart, and everybody's here in many ways. I'm also really excited about a number of other measures that can take advantage of all these learnings now and all these great people that are on this panel and say, okay, we've got these frameworks. Now, how do we apply this to physical activity? How do we apply this to oncology? How do we apply this to Parkinson's? How do we apply this to heart failure? All these different areas and all these different new tools, we now know what's needed. So it's been a really exciting adventure, and I think they complement each other beautifully.
Carrie, thank you so much. And I think exactly as you describe it, the modular nature of this, and then, we can't just talk in the hypothetical endlessly, right? We have to actually start bouncing examples up against it. And we're starting to see the power that has. Christine, how do you look at all of this from the developer's perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I think, as a technology provider, in our day-to-day, we do work with a lot of companies and partners that do have a different level of maturity. So, in some times we have to spend the first half an hour just to align on even the basic terminology. So for us to have frameworks like this and also have them kind of echo and building on top of each other are absolutely necessary for us to make sure we're speaking the same kind of challenges where we're talking about, the same type of validation. Validation can mean many different things. And just like what Carrie said, what I love about this journey that we are on with Nocturnal Scratch is that we're putting the framework to work, right? We're applying them to this concrete problem. And this not only that we're fleshing out, what are other things we need, but also that this really gave us some very tangible things to talk about. In our day-to-day, a lot of times we work, just like Kara said, we work with partners in oncology, in neurology, and etc. And we're really trying to kind of use some of this very concrete work that we put together to help thinking about how can we replicate perhaps more efficiently and apply this framework to other measures and other indications.
Christine, I love that. And I love this sort of very intentional roadmap that you've laid out there. With that in mind, I'd love to sort of pivot a bit to our regulatory colleagues. And Jeff, perhaps I'll start with you. As you think about reviewing the data that we are out here in earnest, putting together, keeping the patient at the center, really thinking about rigor, what's your perspective on where we are in the field right now and the evidence that you're receiving from the regulatory perspective?
So thank you very much. I see digital health technologies as potentially providing a major boon to drug development programs. They let us directly measure clinical concepts of interest that before we only measured indirectly. They measure them in the context of the patient's daily life, and they open the possibility to more remote trials. So tremendous potential here. Let me make a couple points about the regulatory point of view. We see digital health technologies coming into drug development programs in maybe 3 different ways. One is the device can be cleared by CDRH for the particular context of use. The other way, or the next way, is for sponsors to directly submit their data as part of their IND of how they're going to apply that device in the clinical development program. And the third is through the qualification program, either coming in as to be a qualified clinical outcome assessment, or through the iSTAND program, which evaluates drug development tools that aren't either biomarkers or clinical outcome assessments. So those 3 ways are complementary. And in the qualification program, we always get a consult from CDRH to keep our criteria similar. I think the frameworks that have been described in the presentations earlier are very compatible with the way that we look at digital health technology applications in drug development. But I want to make a couple points that reiterate some of the points that Tom was making. One is that verification and analytic validation are very important concepts. When it comes to clinical validation, I think it's really important to realize that a device that's cleared in the general population may not work the same in a patient population. So it's really important to make sure that it performs similarly in the patient population. Next, it's not enough to just measure a clinical concept, but you need to turn that into an endpoint, as Tom said, and I completely agree with that. So being very specific, are you talking about measurements, daily measurements for the first week at baseline versus daily measurements for the 1 week time point at 6 months? And how are you going to measure that? So turning it into an endpoint and a score. And are you talking about average number of coughs per hour? Or are you talking about the frequency of bouts or frequency of severe bouts, using cough as an example? And then finally, when you have a measure that's clinically meaningful for patients, how do you show that the change is indeed clinically meaningful, that it meets that threshold? And I think it's important to look at the patient-focused drug development guidance documents 3 and 4. Number 3 talks about developing endpoints, and number 4 talks about how to show that the change you see in your clinical trial is clinically meaningful to patients. Just real briefly, if you can anchor this on a patient-reported outcome, say severity of the condition, none, mild, mediate, severe, and show that the severity of the digital health technology based assessment corresponds to that, and your treatment moves someone, for example, from severe to moderate or moderate to mild or none. Those would be indications that the change is clinically meaningful. And I'll just stop there. Hope that's helpful.
Jeff, that's more than helpful. I hope everyone on the line was taking notes. That was clear, concise, and that's how we get this done. Torsten, I'm going to come to you. That's a tough act to follow. And you have been leading really sort of exceptional thinking within the European region. Tell me how you think about all this at EMA.
Thank you, Jen. And I really want to congratulate all these activities. I think we have been in conversations with DIME and other actors for a long while. And I think we have to acknowledge we learn a lot of these very promising and valuable measures. Maybe I should point out some particularities in the EU context. And this is clearly that when you come for a qualification opinion at the European Medicines Agency, it is not so much about the device, because we have different regulatory frameworks for medical devices, IVDs, and the development of medicinal products. So it's quite important for developers to keep in mind that basically you need to contact notified bodies, as they are called within the EU, to make sure that the technical performance, the analytical validity is up to scratch. And this will be described, and at the qualification procedure at the EMA, we more look into the clinical validity of the measure, or whatever is the context of use of the measure intended, and will describe this in the qualification opinion document, and will provide a description of minimal performance measures of the target solution profiles to liaise to the deep presentation that needs to be fulfilled for medical devices. In terms of the qualification plan, it's really important to plan prospectively and come early for discussion with us in terms of the evidence to be generated to support digital measures. It's important to structure, I think, deep, and the stack model provides really a good starting point for thinking about how to do this, also in terms of scaling and extension of context of use. Important to show that a measure is valid in different populations, even if in different conditions, even if they are similar or closely related. One aspect I think maybe needs a little bit more attention, and I know FDA colleagues have tried to address that or started to address this, and we are currently thinking how to address this, is that once a measure is qualified, there will be a need for lifecycle management in fast iterating technologies. And then this is something to keep in mind. So it's not done if you get the first stamp. It is to make sure that, with all the welcome technical evolution, the measure keeps up to scratch and provides reliable measurement, which really reflect benefit for patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Torsten. That was very clear. And hi, everybody. Here's Lada. I'm co-moderating with Jen, and I have the pleasure to take us through the next round. And now that we've heard from Jeffrey and from Torsten from the regulator side. I would like to turn us back to our colleagues from industry. And Tarek, the next question is for you. So in terms of validation, can you share any good examples or practices that you are doing in the work that you're carrying out? And we've already heard about some of the current standards that are being used, but anything you would like to reflect from that side?
Thank you, Lada, for the question. I see validation as it's like peeling an onion, right? There's a lot of layers and it will make you cry if you don't know what you're doing. So I think some of those layers, as I think about them, is that, you know, we have a lot on the how, the V3 framework. We kept addressing, you know, and with the plus now we have usability. But I think on the specifics of what's, there's a lot of golden material out there now. Like I consistently refer to the EMA qualification opinion on Duchenne. You know, they have a nice table talking about what you need to do for accuracy, repeatability test, retest, construct validity, you know, responsiveness that Jeff alluded to. Then my second actually reference is the PFDD guidance itself, because there's amazing discussions there about the meaningful change thresholds. How do you look at sensitivity to change? How do you anchor it to your PROs and different methods? So I think those are my go-to resources, coupled with all the other Q&As, the DIME resources, obviously, that are available to all of us. And a lot of those, especially with the health authorities, are very, very enlightening. Then we mustn't forget the overarching scientific principles, right? You need to have controls. You need to have an independent validation set. You better separate your training sets from your test sets, right? All the typical scientific guidelines that should guide us. My other interest in this topic is this biomarker versus COA, because as COAs, you also start thinking more about the patient perspective, which I think it makes it even more interesting. But that's kind of what I go after in my day-to-day. That helps.
Thank you, Tarek. And that biomarker versus COA, we could spend a whole hour here, but I'm not going to go there. Bola, let's continue with you. And I know you have a lot of experience from the digital health technology side as well on the pharma part. So anything you would like to raise there in addition to what was raised already on that validation?
Yeah, thank you, Lada. I love how Tarek just dropped the language bomb and then said, oh, I'm not going to expand on this because, yes, that is another session in itself. Yes, so I think somebody put a question on there, Andrew, I think it was, and he was saying, look, how does all of this match to design controls? Because we understand language is tried, is tested. We know what design freeze means. We know what validation and verification. That's nice and easy, and we can just move on. And then when we're talking about measurements and endpoints and the definitions, is it a car, is it a digital biomarker? Well, it's slightly different territory. And just to complement, there's a perfect presentation that Tom has given. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that, but just to complement what he said and linking back to what Tarek has said, something that is really, really close to my heart is, I think sometimes those of us that are close to this, are passionate about it, we live and breathe it, we sometimes start to drink our own Kool-Aid and we just start to obsess about the technology, and sometimes not deliberately, we kind of forget about the patient. How is this technology usable? What's the usability evidence? And is it actually useful for what we're testing it for versus something else that we did previously? And I think some of those questions we miss sometimes when we're checking our checklist for what we've done, the evidence that we've provided. So I think that continuous questioning in terms of usability across the development profile, from feasibility to product launch in the world of medical devices, or in the implementation of the digital endpoint. Something else that I think that is quite important when we're complementing those different areas is making sure that as we're developing the digital health technology, as we're talking to our vendors, we need to internally start early and talking to each other. So something that we do very well at GSK is making sure that our regulatory colleagues, Caroline, for example, will put her hand up here, are involved from the very, very beginning. So they know that this is what we're talking about, this is what we're trying to do. Is it a labeling claim? Is it to validate an endpoint? Is it something that we can use again? Are we leveraging prior data? I think these points are very, very important, and defining those things up front before we progress is really important. And lastly, something else that is close to my heart is sometimes we forget that evidence is built on a continuum. Sometimes the molecule moves ahead, sometimes the technology. And let's say we park the molecule, sometimes we just shut the technology down. I would like us to think of a different approach of wrapping it up nicely, because it might be one of the amazing things about digital technologies, digital endpoints, digital measurements is we can implement it across different assets. So rather than killing the technology part, let's wrap up the trials around that, and then look for how we can leverage that data in other areas.
Thank you so much, Paula. A lot of very interesting points for everybody to consider and to go faster, as John was asking, to that plateau of productivity. I'm going to turn back to the regulators and let's move from validation to the focus on collaboration. We've heard a lot of very good examples during this webinar series on the importance of collaboration. Bray, can you share anything from your experience as a regulator where you see this field shaping and what the role of partnerships is in streamlining validation efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the proverb, if you want to go far, go together. And this is such a great example of this community coming together and doing the foundational work that doesn't need to be repeated. And if you look at just the expertise, the energy, the passion, and then obviously all the financial resources that different companies have put in, this work that's driving forward as a team sport for patients and better measuring what's most important and clinically meaningful is just an incredible example. And I think also the eyes up on the scalability of these frameworks it just is going to make tremendous return on investment. So I just think this collaborative model and there's a big role for pre-competitive consortia like this to come together and one, build a consensus, but there's just no reason to do these one-offs and try to go this alone. So anytime you're developing a novel endpoint, it's a heavy lift, and I think this collaborative model is very exciting, and congratulations to all the companies and the groups that have done this work so far.
Thank you, Bray. And Carrie, let's turn it to you. You have had the experience of the collaboration actually leading this. Can you share your experience and any tips that you would have for people on the line if they want to replicate?
There were a lot of passionate people that had a similar goal. So I think one of the key things that was learning is to come in with really key deliverables. So I think both with the DIME and the DEEP, we had clear outcomes that we wanted, clear things that we wanted to get out of both. And when you do that, everybody comes together. So I've known many people on this line panel and throughout pharma now for over 5 years. We've been working together, meeting several times a month, discussing these things, all with a common goal of those deliverables. And I think having those goals in mind and really having that shared passion, as was clearly discussed earlier, thank you for the kind words, has really brought this forward in a collaborative way. We all want to see digital measures be utilized. We see it coming in healthcare. It's going to happen. It's already happening in some ways. So let's work together and test all these systems and bring success. And I think that was everyone's common goal. So have clear outcomes, clear deliverables, bring people that want to work together, and you'll have success in the end, I feel.
Thank you, Carrie. Absolutely. I think you nailed it, really. Christine, anything for the DHT development side and collaboration there?
Yeah, maybe just a bit of comment, again, reflecting on this Nocturnal Scratch journey we're on. I love the fact that a lot of this collaboration effort really kind of build onto each other, right? This is something that Jan alluded to in the beginning. The content validation and the patient-focused work done by DIME was really a great step forward and really kind of laid out the land for a lot of us. And as Actigraph, we specialize in the technical verification, validation, etc. So let's tackle this with our pharma partners in our, kind of special collaboration effort. And I think that just, again, regulator is a key stakeholder, and I think collaboration like this also make their work more efficient, right? I mean, they're all very, very busy people. I think if they go together and really clear about what we're asking, it would make their work easier. And also, like DEEP have shared the learning with EMA. It's really saving a lot of time and effort for the community to move together.
Thank you, Christine. And well, Torsten, Jeff, I think that question was for you. Any thoughts from your side on how these collaborative teams should come to regulators, engage with you, and what would set them up for success? And Torsten, if we start with you, and Jeff, we close with you, and then we go to concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Lara. I think it's really important, and this was an important aspect that we engaged in the deep pilot, that we think that really this pre-competitive collaboration is key, and engagement with patients is key, to really make sure that relevant patient benefit can be reflected and measured and brought to regulatory decision-making. In terms of how regulatory success can be facilitated within the EU or for the European Medicines Agency, it is, I would just mention, come early and engage and discuss. We have an early discussion forum, which is called Innovation Task Force, ITF, that was used for the deep pilot. Very much recommended to engage first there. It's free of charge, no fees. And we are very much interested in being exposed to new technologies, new thoughts, because I mean, it's clearly to acknowledge there is a learning curve on our side as well. I think we are all learning and we do appreciate the challenge. Once there is a clear idea of how the evidence for qualification is to be generated, come for qualification advice. Share this advice within the community, so that will facilitate other developers the work. So maybe no qualification advice is needed for the next development. And then, of course, come for qualification opinion. It is important, as I mentioned already, that in the EU, there are different regulatory frameworks for medical devices, IVDs, so be please aware of that. And in terms of, the main things that we see that is often challenging for measure developers is that what has already also been mentioned by Jeff is the anchoring in established measures or having distribution-based methods at hand, and importantly, to demonstrate the ability to detect change and to define meaningfully the minimal important clinical difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Thorsten. Jeff, anything to add from your side?
Actually, Thorsten has summarized many of the important things that I would say for the FDA. Come to speak to the FDA early with your program so that we can collaborate on making sure that you have the evidence base you need to take it forward, whether you're going to CDRH for the device, to the qualification program to qualify your clinical outcome assessment, or directly to the review division. I guess my last comment would be that it's so important to keep the patient at the center of our thinking. So make sure in companies that the group that's developing the device and the specifications works closely with the outcome assessment group to make sure that everybody's working together. And then make sure that the endpoint that you put together is clinically meaningful for patients, and that you really have a good understanding of how much change would be clinically meaningful to patients. But I think this collaboration is a great start, and really look forward to the next steps.
Thank you very much. So you've heard it from all of the different stakeholders, go early to regulators. There are frameworks already out there ready for your use in how to validate digital measures. Collaboration is key, so look for those groups that have the same interest. You have here really the key stakeholders that are driving this field. You see regulators are interested, guidances are out there, and they also have engagement opportunities. So with this, I will hand it back to Lucy. Thank you, Jen, for the fantastic co-moderation, all of our speakers and panelists. And Lucy, over to you for a wrap-up.
Thank you very much, Lada, Jen, for moderating this amazing discussion, and to all of our panelists for joining us today. I know it would be great to have at least 30 more minutes to get into all of the details and all of the things that we would love to cover. But even this has been a really great and insightful discussion from all kinds of stakeholders all around the field, all of the people you who have been on the forefront of development of digital measures and also digital measure of nocturnal scratch for many years now. And we thank you for this amazing case example that many other collaborators, many other developers and industry partners can follow with other measures and with more research that will, in the end, improve patients' lives. So thank you very much. Keep doing this amazing job for our audience. Thank you for being here, and you will find recording also of this session on the webinar page of Dime. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.